So today we are going to work on a really important exercise, the approximate proportions of a human face. So I know a lot of you all want to just jump right in and start drawing people. It's hard. People are hard. I think it's one of the harder things unless you're sort of just attuned to drawing people, which it's pretty rare that I come across a student who's really, really good at it, just sort of inclined that way. And I am definitely not one of those people. So every stride that I've made in learning how to draw the human face has been hard-earned, I tell you. So this is one of the exercises that I think can make it a little bit easier. In some ways, it's related to what we've already done with structural lines. So I've got some links for those up here. In another way, it's kind of related to what some people do with the grid. And I do use the grid for the human face. I think it helps and is helpful in getting the proportions in the right place and the features in the right place. So if you need a link for the grid, then I'll put those up here too. However, I think you have to understand the relationship between the facial features. And of course, every human face is going to be completely different. Even identical twins don't have everything identical about them. So what you need to do is sort of learn a standard for what an ideal, perfect human face would look like. And I'm going to show you a really funny version of it because it doesn't look very appealing. But then I use this standard to compare it to every image that I'm looking at of a person's face. And then I can see where their features vary from the standard. And it helps me to create a relationship between the features so that I'm getting them in a placement and spacing that's more accurate. So I'm going to show you what it looks like when it's finished. And then we're going to walk through and do it step by step. For this exercise, it is kind of helpful to have a handful of colored pencils. And I've got just cheapy colored pencils that I use with some of my students, the Soho Urban Artist colored pencil. I don't usually recommend them. They're not that great. But for this exercise, it's good because I needed a variety of colored pencils. So let's look down at the page and I'll show you what the standard looks like. And then I'll walk you through it step by step. Okay, so these are my approximate proportions, and you can see that nothing is perfectly laid out. I've got a nice little mug shot, I joke, but it's a passport photo of my videographer, Parker, that we'll be able to use to compare if we need to. I'm going to set that aside for now because we probably don't need it right in the beginning. But the idea is that I'm going to, well, maybe let's pull it back in here. So I'm going to determine, where the eyes are on the face, where the nose is on the face, where the ears are on the face in this standard way. And then once I have this standard, I'll actually be able to compare it to a real person and go through the steps in the same order. So this is actually really important. If you go through these steps in this same order when you're drawing a real person, as opposed to this sort of mock-up of a face, if you go through the steps in the same order, they relate to each other. So once you have the placement of the eyes, it's going to help you with the placement of the nose width and the width of the mouth. If I were to do the width of the nose before I have the eyes, it's not going to help me. If I were to do the width of the mouth before I have the eyes, it's not going to help me. So the order and the placement is really important. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this beside, and hopefully you'll be able to see both. And then I'm going to do another version of this step by step so that you can see the order that I do it in. And what I like to do, and I'm not going to take the time to write this all out again, and maybe let's tear a piece of paper out so that you can see these a little bit closer. But what I like to do is color code and write a little bit about each step so that I have this as a record. I'll know to go back through this again when I'm looking at a new face. So the first step is the outline of the face, and this is really important You want to include on the outline of the face from the top of the hair. Let's use a color so you can see this. The top of the hair to the bottom of the chin. So I'm not going to go from the hairline to the chin, but rather the top of the head, including all of the hair to the chin. Okay, so I start with just doing an oval. If my oval's not perfect, I don't worry about it. Okay, next step is that I'm going to do what I call the central axis, and this is for a front view. Because our photograph of our person is looking head on, I'm going to do a central axis that's right down through the center. If it's helpful to use a ruler to do that, you can approximate. Let's see, is that the center? It's probably over a little bit because my oval isn't perfect. There's my central axis, so second step. The third step is going to be finding where the eyes are placed from top to bottom of the head. Now, this is something that sometimes throws people off, but the eye line is typically, let's see if we can, I don't have my measuring dowel here, so I'll turn this sideways. It's so miniature. This might be difficult to do, but I'm going to measure the height from the center of the eye to the top of the head, and then from the center of the eye to the chin. And Parker's chin is just a hair larger. So the bottom half of his face from the eye line here to the chin line is just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit larger than from the middle of the eye to the top of the hair. Maybe if he just spiked his hair up a little bit, it would be perfectly equal. So that's usually surprising to people. Most of the time we think of the eyes as being like way up here on the top of the head. That's if you're not including the space from the hairline to the top of the head, which usually adds another inch or so onto a portrait. So our eyes are actually equally placed generally from the top of our head to our eye line. Then from the eye line to the chin, it's usually just about the same amount of space. Surprising, isn't it? So next, I'm going to draw that in, and I can sort of approximate where my halfway is, or it helps me to turn the page sideways and just kind of make a mark. I think that's about halfway. And then I usually put that in as sort of a curved line because our head is curved. Okay, next up, the hairline. So this is going to be one of those features that's entirely variable depending upon the person. If somebody has bangs like I do, then your hairline is going to be maybe not seen. If I were to pin my hair over to the side, then you could see it. Some people are balding, and so their hairline will be further back on their head. Some people have shaved their heads, so you have no hair at all. So this is just going to be something that's really different depending upon the person. So I'm going to just make up a hairline here, or I could actually use Parker's, and Parker's looks like it's about here. Okay, so that's the hairline. Next step is that I'm going to divide from the hairline to the chin into equal thirds. And this just helps me to place the other features that I'm about to do. You could sort of use a rationale of going from the hairline to the middle of the eye, to the bottom of the nose, to the chin, but those usually aren't equal thirds for most people. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from this edge here to this edge here, and I'm just going to eyeball it or sight it. If it's easier for you to use sighting, you can sort of pick, here's a third, here's a third, that's too big. So sometimes I mess up and make mistakes, but I'm just gonna sort of guesstimate here. I'm gonna guess that that's a third. and that's a third. And you can check it by using sighting. And if you aren't sure how to do sighting, then I can link to a video over here for you. So that's pretty close. This midsection is a little bit too big. Let's make this one up a little bit higher. And then I'll erase this one so I don't get confused. Okay, so what I've done now is here I have a third, here I have 1/3, and here I have another third. And that's going to help me to place the features when I'm looking at somebody's face in particular. Okay, next step. The bottom of the second third usually guides you to see where the tip of the nose is. So now this is going to depend a lot upon your camera angle. For example, if I'm looking head on at somebody, say I'm drawing them in person, and I'm going to look at where is the bottom of the edge of my nose rather than the tip of my nose, so the bottom lower part of my nose. If you're looking up somebody's nose like this, it's going to be a much different proportion, okay? If your camera is above, or your view is above, or I'm tilting my head down, that's going to be a totally different proportion. So keep in mind that this is for just a perfectly centered, if possible, front view, and different rules will apply for different angles. So I'm going to not look at Parker's picture because it's too teeny for me to do this, but I'm just going to generalize that the bottom of the nose is oftentimes at the bottom of your second third here. And then when you're looking at a photograph or at a person, you'll have to really sight that and see, is that exactly where the nose falls or not? Okay, next we're going to divide the end of the nose to the chin, and we're going to divide that in several different ways. So, well, you have several options. We'll only divide it in one way, but you have to choose which option. So think of it like this. You can look at the upper part of the space of the face above the lip, which is actually called the philtrum, which means, I can't remember, it's love charm in Latin. So this part is called the philtrum. That space is often small, then the lips are medium, and then the chin is large. So that's one way that you can divide this third. The other way is you could just divide it into equal thirds and then see where that falls on the person that you're looking at. So I'm going to divide this into a small section here, a medium section here, and then a large section here. So here's the small, that's your philtrum. It's spelled, where is it? It's a crazy word, isn't it? Who knew we all had a philtrum? Okay, so small. The medium is going to be the lips. And then the large is the chin. Now, this is one of those measurements that's entirely variable upon the person. Some people have much larger, fuller lips. Some people have really thin, flat lips. Some people have a huge chin. Some people have no chin. I mean, it's rare that you're going to see a larger or smaller philtrum. Those are pretty standard. It seems like that size doesn't change that much. However, you might see somebody that has a much different proportion. So remember that this is the standard that you're sort of measuring your image of the person against, but that doesn't mean that you're going to find a small, medium, and large portion. But if you just divide it that way and then compare it to the photograph, then you're going to be able to determine where to place those features more accurately so that you can get the drawing looking exactly like the person that you're drawing, or close. Okay, next step is then to divide the eye line into fifths. So this is one of those confusing things, and we're gonna look at the camera again here. So if I were to measure one width of my eye, that will inform me about the width between my two eyes. And this is almost exactly standard on everybody. So some people will have wider eyes. They'll have a wider bridge of their nose and space between their eyes. Some people will have narrower eyes and they'll have a narrower space. It's rare that you don't find that correlation of the width of the eye being the width of the space between the eyes. And here's the other thing that's kind of cool. The width of my eye is the same space, and it's easier if I turn my head, but the width of my eye here is the same space from the edge of my eye to my hairline. So it's different if I turn my head here, that's going to be an equal measurement. But when we're looking at somebody head on, this space right here is actually moving back in space. So that's that first rule of perspective. And this space will appear narrower, even though it's not narrower, it's just moving away from me because my face is curving back in space. So what we're going to do on the page, if you look down here, is we're going to determine this distance between the two eyes, copy it for both eyes so that we have the same thirds there. And then we want this to be a smaller distance between the outer edge of the eye and the hairline, and a smaller distance here to account for that perspective. So sometimes I'll switch to a regular pencil here so I can guess if I want that to be 1/3, then I'm going to cite that and measure it over. Would that be smaller? Yes, I think I could probably afford to make it a little bit bigger. So we'll make it a little bit bigger on both sides. And let's see if that looks like it fills the face a little bit better. So you can see that I always have to adjust when I'm making these approximations. And now that's much narrower. And the same will be true here. So notice that I started with the center spacing, because if you start on one side, it's much harder because you're starting with a small section and a small section, as opposed to trying to get it perfectly equal. So we want them to be placed along our central axis so that we don't have one eye over to the left and one eye over to the right. Okay, so then I'm going to draw in just sort of a basic almond shape for the eye. And the only reason that I'm doing this is because eventually we're going to need to know where the center of the eye is, the pupil. So this is where our person starts to look kind of creepy. But it gets the job done. So remember that this is a fifth if we were looking at it in 3D space, but flat on the page, the first fifth and the fifth fifth are going to be smaller. And then the second, third, and fourth ones will all be equal. So that's how you plan out where your eyes go. Next up, we are going to use the inside edge of the eyes to determine where the outside edge of the nose go. So the edges here, you can kind of see this, that if I drew a line, this is too teeny of a picture probably, but if I drew a line here between the outer edge of the nose to the inner edge of the eye, they would mostly line up. Sometimes there's some variation again. So again, you can just kind of give yourself a guide and suggest this is where you're going to be looking for the outer edge of the nose. It might be that you find that it's wider and further over. It might be narrower and further in. So that's going to be a variation that you see on people. Then I'm going to use those pupils that I just drew and draw a line down to determine where the relationship of the outer edge of the mouth is going to be. So remember, our mouth, the lips are in the medium section usually, or the second, third. And typically, unless people are smiling or frowning, oh, I think my pencil's about to break. Typically, you're going to see that the outer edge of the mouth lines up with the pupil. Every once in a while, it'll be a little bit wider or a little bit narrower. You're going to see that variation because we all have unique faces. Last, we're going to figure out where the ears go. So let's bring this picture of Parker back. So we can see that at the bottom of the ear, it's somewhere right here in between the upper lip and the nose. And the top of the ear is somewhere right around the eyes. So sometimes people have smaller ears or larger ears, and you're going to see that the height of their ear is up more by their eyebrows, or the bottom of the ear is going to be lower down towards the mouth. That's going to vary as well. So you're going to want to see where in relationship to the eye, to the eyebrow, do the ears go, and where in relationship to the bottom of the nose and the bottom of the mouth does the bottom of the ear go. And here's the other tricky thing. Sometimes people's ears are not equal. So it is very common to see that somebody's ear is lower on one side and higher on the other side. Sometimes that could be because their head is tilted or the camera wasn't level, but sometimes it's actually that the ears are not equal. Okay, last step that we're going to look at is the jawline. So here's your jawline. I've just drawn sort of a blanket oval, so we aren't really looking at the person that we're drawing in this case. We need to add that detail in. So sometimes you're going to see a very oval jawline. Sometimes you'll see somebody with more of a square jawline, so it'll be more like angled, and you can see bends. And sometimes you'll see somebody with more of a heart shape, and the heart shape really is just because their jawline is more pointed and it's narrower than the oval. So those are the three sort of standards for jawlines that you can look for. So now you've done all those steps. You have your standard, that's sort of like your model. And now what you want to do is take a photograph of yourself, look at yourself in the mirror, and see where your features adjust and move and are slightly higher, slightly lower, or slightly wider, slightly narrower compared to the standard. Or you can take a photograph of somebody and do this, or look on the internet and find a photograph. Remember, this is just for faces that are totally facing forward, not looking down, not looking up, not turning to the right or to the left at all. So not turning side to side. I think I probably just said that opposite, but I don't know how the camera is going to see it and flip it around. That part is beyond me, but not looking side to side, okay? So this is just for that face, head on, totally perfectly centered view, and it's going to help you to lay out all of those facial features that are so difficult to do. So I hope this one really is helpful for you guys and furthers your progress when you're drawing faces, and let me know if you have any questions.